Hey everyone, welcome to my very first solo movie review. This time, Batman vs. Superman. I had a lot to say about this movie, but I couldn't record it right away because I really had to sit and stew with this information and process the movie. It's very dense, there's a lot to process, but finally done it. So, here it is. Also, I want to let you guys know, very mild spoilers, but I'm not really going to be talking about the film itself too much, but more about what plagued the film, what happened behind the scenes to make this thing so divisive between fans and critics alike. So, let's get right into it. I liked the opening of this movie, seeing it from Bruce's point of view, all the destruction happening between Zod and Superman's fight from Man of Steel. It felt like an actual alien invasion that way, you know, the way Man of Steel was supposed to feel. It was a very strong opening. Then we get Batman's origin again, but more the Incredible Hulk style, and there wasn't too much time wasted here, but Snyder wanted his own shot at it and he gave it to us. But we also weren't beaten over the head with it, so it's acceptable. I like the visual storytelling. Now, you're going to hear a lot of people say the same things about the structure of this film, the pacing. It was choppy, disjointed, discombobulated, and they're right. There is a lot of exposition in this film that quickly transitions from one place to the next without an establishing shot or coherent edit jumps that feel justified. We feel led by the nose here. We're never really given ample time to get comfortable enough to get a beat on what's happening with the film. It's not an on the edge of your seat type of uncomfortable. It's more like lost in a dark room searching for a light switch. I don't want to talk too much about the pros as in the narrative of the film because there is so much more I do want to get into that isn't exactly just about what we see on screen. There is a lot of behind the scenes things I think warrant discussion as to why this huge blockbuster is so divisive, or just kind of a letdown. The first culprit I think that needs to be identified is one David S. Goyer. I know a lot of people want to point a finger at Snyder, but truly a director can only do so much with what is clearly a bad script. We've all heard how Snyder is a director that is style over substance, and while that might very well be the case, there's no denying that the best director in the world can't make a great movie with a shitty script. A film, a narrative, it all starts with the ink on the page. If that's bad, it's just a house of cards because story is the foundation in which you build your entire movie on, and that entire structure is subject to crumbling down like the buildings of Metropolis when you have a bad script. Goyer may as well be General Zod, and as much as Snyder can try to be Superman, there will always be a lot of destruction, i.e. a bad movie. Goyer is a man who has publicly mocked comic book characters like She-Hulk, saying she was only created to give Hulk someone to fuck. His words, not mine. He has publicly asked comic book fans if they knew who Martian Manhunter was. Then the fans with their hands raised, he went to insulting them, asking how many of them with their hands raised have actually been laid. Then he boldly follows that with a brash statement like Martian Manhunter was a stupid origin and a stupid name. He's the last Martian. Why is that dumb? Is that ringing any blue and red clad bells here? So why is a man who is so unapologetically biting the hand that feeds still writing these movies? Why is Warner Brothers still asking him to pen scripts for them? I don't know if he has a contract with them or what, but he's also one of the screenwriters behind Nolan's trilogy. Now, I know critically these movies were received well, but there's also very little opposition from fans that the overall tone in these films work for Batman in his own isolated films, but not from Superman. The humglum feeling saturating the entire movie really detracts from when something that is supposed to be emotionally impactful happens, and when that glum feeling is just dripping from every line and scene, it just doesn't land. It's just that same sentiment carried throughout the film just doesn't land when something that is actually depressing is supposed to happen. Now, barring discussion about a mixed fan reception about The Dark Knight Rises and the problems that movie had, this style of hyper-realism does not work for a character who hails from a fictional planet, who gains super strength from a yellow sun, he can fly, he's the biggest Boy Scout you've ever seen, and he wears bright red and blue spandex. Do I need to remind anybody about Goyer's comments about Martian Manhunter's origins? Man of Steel was not the critical success of a launching platform Warner Brothers hoped when kickstarting their shared universe. So why the hell is this ass clown still brought back to pen Batman vs. Superman? Most agreed that the drab, muted color palette for Superman didn't work. The non-linear storytelling felt too much like a Batman Begins clone. So why is he still part of the creative team? Is he the major culprit behind the lukewarm responses his films have been getting? Let's also not forget that this is the same guy that directed Blade Trinity and drove Snipes to just phone it in as Blade. Affleck even brought in his Argo screenwriter to come in and redraft the script, but I have a hard time believing that the man was able to do a whole lot since the studio had already sank $250 million into the script that they'd already approved. So my guess is the parts of Batman that everyone's really been liking come from the screenwriter of Argo. Which brings me to the production of the film. If you kept up with production news, you know that Batman vs. Superman was originally slated for a 2015 release, but for undisclosed reasons was pushed back to 2016. I can speculate all day as to why. I'm sure there were reshoots. For better or worse, I don't know, but there were reshoots. But what I can tell you is from a filmmaking standpoint, having all that time in the editing room is not always a plus. That leaves you with an extra year to second guess yourself. This is one of the advantages of television, severe time crunch. Shoot it, edit it, and go with your gut instinct. I'm sure at some point in all our lives we've taken a test and second guessed ourselves where we marked an answer, then erased it and marked a new one after 5 minutes of deliberations in our head, only to get that test back and find that our original answer was indeed the right one. Now extrapolate that 1,000 times and you get Batman vs. Superman. All of that time in the editing room, and you just try and fit everything together in so many different ways, you get tunnel vision to the point where you don't even know if it's good or not. So I think the year delay could have actually hindered this film's success more than it actually helped. With that in mind, let's get into the actual movie a bit. Far and away, the highlight of this film was Batman and Bruce Wayne. And if I may, I was never on the Affleck hate train. I stated from day one he would look more like the Bruce Wayne that we all know than any other previous actor to don the cowl, and I'm happy to say that I was right, and everyone universally seems to agree. Yeah, I'm bragging about being right. I also never hated on the Ledger casting either. Hollywood, you hear me knocking? Affleck brought everything to the character that you'd want, and looked awesome in the first ever not all black Batman costume, so bravo. Again, probably echoing a lot of what everyone else has said, but it is definitely a more brutal, brawler-esque Batman than we've ever seen. Affleck deserves the praise, and there's really no need to go any further into him because he was the best part of the film and the primary focus out of all the characters, which is really no surprise because Snyder has come out and said that Batman is his favorite character, and it shows because Snyder's Batman debut was a love letter to the character. Next up is the Joe Frazier to Ali's Batman, Superman. Not really too many complaints here. Cavill was fine as Superman, not a whole lot of character growth that can really be seen from his Man of Steel appearance, essentially the same character and portrayal as before. The characterization he's done justice. The only complaints are really not with Superman himself, but with the circumstances that dictate his behavior for convenient plot points that I can discuss later. And what would the Trinity be without the hardened, ass-kicking female warrior princess Wonder Woman, which should have been left out of all the promotional material to make her arrival that much more exciting. Wonder Woman had all of 16 lines of dialogue in the film, so it's hard to gauge if Gal Gadot was really good as Diana Prince. I will say, I was strongly against the casting initially, and still have my reservations about her as Wonder Woman. All the moments where she kicks ass, she's great. But people seem to have a hard time differentiating between good action and good acting. Most of her delivered lines are pretty wooden and stale, as I expected. A small exchange between her and Bruce, she did well, but everything else was just okay. In action, it could be a stunt woman or CGI, and no one would know the difference, so I can't say yet that she's a great Wonder Woman, because action is not acting. And the way she moves looks great, but I can't help but wonder if in her own solo movie we will see her move the same way, because different directors have different visual styles, i.e. Captain America the First Avenger versus Winter Soldier. If they slow her down or power her down, I think some may cry foul and long for her movement style in Batman vs. Superman. The last character I really am going to touch on is Lex Luthor. Not much to say. It was a controversial casting decision from the start, and it didn't pan out well for you, Warner Brothers. Eisenberg's Luthor was so far a departure from the source that it was unrecognizable. Plain and simple. Bane in name only, now we have Luthor in name only. Definitely the most disrespected character from his comic book counterpart. Luthor is an Omega level genius. He is methodical, calculating, and usually level-headed, always playing an angle that we just can't quite see. This Luthor has very little foresight and lucks out in his film because things go, quote, go to plan. Look, if you want an accurate portrayal of Lex Luthor, watch Young Justice or All-Star Superman. But anyways, let's get into the movie itself a bit now. There's no denying that the film took heavily from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. In some ways it absolutely excels, in others it really falls short of hitting its mark. In the ways it falls short is simply this Superman has not been around long enough for this storyline to make sense to be introduced yet. The whole point of The Dark Knight Returns was really to showcase that a hero's work is never done, even after he's been told to stop. The conflicting ideology of the law versus necessity. Superman represents the law and Batman represents the laws just don't work, and the hand of justice must do what is morally right even if it dictates acting outside the law. So when Superman finally shows up as the president's lapdog, and what we can tell he's been one for a long time, it just naturally brings the two to blows because conflicting representations of good versus order. In the movie it is shown as a stroke of luck that is, quote, planned by Luthor. You could pick it apart, but I won't. One of the greatest lines in The Dark Knight Returns is when Superman says to Batman, "Stop this, Bruce. If it's not me, they'll just send somebody else," in which Batman brilliantly retorts, "Oh yeah? Who do they send after you?" That is just perfect. After you are tried against the law and win, you are untouchable. But Superman hasn't been around long enough to play this antagonist against Batman, to be a perversion of the American dream. Which brings me to my next comic book inspired storyline, lazily forced in at the last minute. Spoiler, the death of Superman. In the comics, the series worked as an event. The aftershock was felt and rattled throughout the pages of DC. Some fans argue that the story itself was not executed well, but there's no denying the impact it had on the comic community as a whole. Again, Superman has not been around long enough or established long enough in this film universe to have the same cathartic impact that the comic series did. For some reference, Superman was created in the 30s and killed in the 90s. Nearly 60 years of adventures, exploits, character building, and relationship building to actually feel the weight and implications of the murder of Superman. This is Superman's second outing in the film universe, only 18 months after the events of Man of Steel. He hasn't been around long enough for the general public to come to a consensus of whether or not he can even be called a hero. He was responsible indirectly for thousands of deaths, millions in property damage, and politicians are currently debating if he is a necessity or if they even want him around. And if that wasn't enough, they had to create another instance to antagonize this debate. As if the events of Metropolis weren't controversial enough, and it was a half-assed execution at best, because in the theater I remember asking myself, wait, are they talking about that little skirmish where Superman saved helpless Lois Lane for about 3 minutes? Wouldn't the events of Metropolis not only been a better through line and connective tissue for Man of Steel, but also, was it not a big enough catastrophe to work on its own and in a grander scale? But I digress. This Superman is not the seasoned veteran who has saved the world countless times over. This is a man who, by the end of this film, has only really been on display twice. And the first time he leveled the city. No matter what your personal thoughts on Superman are, if you witnessed that destruction on the news, you would call him a menace at the very least. But credit where credit is due. They had a very small montage of Superman saving some people from natural disasters, but not enough to counterbalance the sheer level of destruction left in his wake. So, when they finally get around to killing Superman, which had all the red flag signs of Man of Steel Pa Kent death scene, in which I mean, there were several ways Superman could have killed Doomsday without sacrificing himself, but to mark the checklist for comic accuracy, they'd have to kill Superman for the mere fact they introduced Doomsday. And I applauded that ballsy decision to do so, even though I had my grievances with it. Still a ballsy move on Warner Brothers' part. Then we get to the funeral scene, which was actually done very well and almost made me tear up. What can I say? I'm a sucker for bagpipes at a solemn moment. But then all of it is undone by the reneging of the ballsy decision by leaving us with an X-Men 3 type Magneto-esque teaser of the dirt on the coffin starting to rise, indicating that Superman isn't dead. This could possibly be a switcheroo from The Dark Knight Returns, in which Batman stages his own death, but Superman doing it? Why? More likely, it's just Warner Brothers and Snyder and team saying, well, you can't have Superman dead for a Justice League movie. Which is the perfect segue into my last talking point, the Justice League setup. After all, it is subtitled Dawn of Justice. While the marquee title fight, Batman vs. Superman, didn't really live up to its promise, the Dawn of Justice undercarriage definitely did. Question is, was it successful? Short answer, yes and no. It delivered on setting up the Justice League and giving us all the cameos of Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, but they were far from satisfying. In fact, if there was any reshoots or additional shooting and last-minute editing, this is the crown jewel signifier. The cameos are grotesquely shoehorned in via an email attachment from Bruce to Diana. The thumbnails of the attachments already have the hero's iconic symbols created to be clicked on and give us a surveillance footage of each character in action briefly. The coolest one being Cyborg. It reminded me a bit of the new RoboCop when you can see how much of the man is actually left when the armor's not on him. Silas Stone is actually played by the same guy that created the Terminator in Terminator 2. Maybe that guy should just stop toying with cybernetics. But the iconic symbols already created takes away from the heroes creating them on their own and effectively prevents the heroes from becoming heroes of their own volition. This implies that Luthor subsequently is somewhat responsible for creating these heroes and even by extension the Justice League, because Bruce got these files from Luthor Tech. So in the end, when Bruce tells Diana that they need to assemble these other metahumans, it's only through Luthor does he know of their existence, and assembling them is more or less playing right into the hands of Luthor's diabolical plans. And why does Bruce feel the need to assemble these metahumans at all? Well, that's because of these dream sequences that happen to us as rapid fire that completely interrupt the pacing of an already disjointed film. And to be honest, these really aren't even dream sequences, they're premonitions, which to me felt ham-fisted and out of place for a few reasons, but the biggest being that they're Batman's premonitions. Since when does Batman delve into metaphysics and the mystical? He is a detective, a man of science and cold hard fact. It's completely out of character for him to heed these premonitions as warning signs, much less take them as anything else but a bad dream. These premonitions allude to Darkseid, which is further expounded upon by Lex in jail at the end. And we even get the Flash looking like absolute garbage. Seriously, fuck you, Ezra. Playing with the time by going into the Speed Force and warning Bruce that Lois Lane is the key. Now, I'm not going to touch on Lois Lane at all, but even though this was shitty for multiple reasons, I appreciated the nod from the comics that is either Crisis on Infinite Earths or Flashpoint, or stretching it a bit, it could be Justice League Gods Among Us, judging by that ridiculous Flash costume. And Ezra, you look like shit in that costume. You look like shit in your man bun. I'm not behind you at all. Fuck your Flash movie. And these also could be some hints towards a Throne of Atlantis or Justice League War thing from the New 52. I can appreciate it in those capacities, but it doesn't detract from the fact that the look and timing of it warrants a shit sticker be pinned on it. It was pretty much what everyone had complaints about with Iron Man 2, that this was just a world-building platform film, except this one was less coherent and entirely too long. Now, I know there is a R-rated 3-hour cut that's supposed to happen. I'm looking forward to that, but I honestly just don't know what else you could put into this movie to make it seem better. Anyways, guys, that's my initial review. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I think plagued the film overall and why fans and critics just cannot seem to agree on what's going on in this movie. Be on the lookout later this weekend, hopefully, or early next week, where I get a few of my buddies to just have a free-for-all, have at it, talk about this. We're going to do it unedited, uncut, whatever you hear, that's what happened in the conversation. So I hope you guys look forward to that. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Please leave the comments down below. What did you guys think about Batman vs. Superman? Did you like it? Did you love it? Do you hate me for talking so much shit about it? Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Please tune in next time. I appreciate it. Jake, out.